There's a very specific kind of pain this drama goes after, and it hits like a clean slap, the moment someone looks at you like you're disposable, like your effort was just background noise. And in The Loser Ex-Husband is the great savior, they don't ease you into that feeling. They dunk your head in it and hold you there long enough that when the character finally comes up for air, you're gasping with him. I'm talking to you from the bongo gaming corner of the internet where we don't do polite little summaries and call it a day. If you like this kind of story-driven review where I actually tell you what it felt like to watch, hit subscribe, casual, no pressure, just come hang out. And spoiler-wise, I'm keeping it light. I'm going to talk premise, tone, the emotional mechanics, and some early-ish moments that are basically baked into the setup, but I'm not going to march you through the later reveals like it's a police report. So, the hook of this drama is shameless and kind of delicious. Sion is a hidden savior type, that, if you only knew what I've done for you, guy, and he spends 3 years as a live-in husband getting humiliated to keep a promise. That already tells you what kind of meal you're being served. This is a catharsis drama. It's a slow-cooked resentment stew. It's a watch them regret it fantasy with a hero whose dignity has been pawned off for loyalty. And the thing that surprised me is how quickly the show establishes that humiliation isn't just a plot point, it's the atmosphere. It's in the way people talk over him. It's in the way rooms seem to close around him. It's in that specific framing where he's technically in the scene, but emotionally he's treated like furniture. If you've ever been the person doing the work while someone else collects the credit, you're going to feel your jaw tighten in the first stretch. Here's the question that kept bugging me in the best way early on: why does he stay? Not because promise, not the surface answer. I mean, why does he accept the shape of his own life for that long without exploding? And I don't think the drama wants that to be a simple saintly answer, either. It plays like a mix of discipline and self-punishment, like he's using loyalty as an excuse to endure something he thinks he deserves. That's spicy character psychology for a drama with a title this blunt. Let me paint one moment, no big twist, just vibe, because this is where I knew the director understood the assignment. There's an early confrontation energy, the kind where everyone's standing in a space that feels too bright, too clean, too public for what's happening emotionally. The camera doesn't do anything flashy. It just lingers at the wrong time. It stays on Sion's face a beat longer than comfort, like it's daring you to watch him swallow the words he actually wants to say. And you can almost hear the sound design pulling back, like the room noise is there but dulled, because when humiliation hits, your hearing goes weird. You're not processing the full world anymore. You're processing one sentence. One look. One laugh that wasn't meant to be funny but lands like a shove. That's the craft I didn't expect from something that could have been played purely for cheap revenge thrills. The Loser Ex-Husband is the great savior actually spends real time making the loser part feel like a role that's being forced onto him, not a personality trait. And that matters, because if the show makes him pathetic, then his later backbone feels like a genre switch. But if it makes him restrained, trained, even, then the shift reads like inevitability. Now, we have Cersei. And look, I'm not here to do the thing where we pretend she's not acting cold. She is. The storyline literally tells you she casts him out. But the more interesting thing is the drama's choice to make her coldness feel practiced. Not impulsive. Not a one-off temper flare. It's the kind of chill that says she's been rehearsing this version of herself for a long time, and maybe she convinced herself it was strength. And I know the obvious read is, villain wife gets what's coming. That's the dopamine the premise offers you. But my contrarian take, respectfully, because I can already hear the comments clearing their throats, is that the show is a lot more compelling when you watch Cersei like a person protecting a fragile status quo, not a cartoon kicking puppies. If she's only evil, there's no tension. If she's a human being who's made a choice and doubled down so hard she can't admit she's wrong without collapsing her identity, then every scene between her and Sion turns into a quiet war over reality itself. And yes, I'm going to say something slightly annoying but true, Sion's silent suffering is not automatically noble. Sometimes it's control. Sometimes it's pride dressed up as sacrifice. Sometimes it's the ego comfort of thinking, one day they'll understand. I'm not accusing him of being secretly bad. I'm saying the drama flirts with the idea that his endurance isn't just love, it's a strategy. Even if he'd never admit that out loud. If you're the kind of viewer who needs your protagonist to speak up early and often, this drama will test you. Because it leans into the frustration. It wants you to squirm. It wants you to yell at the screen. It's basically engineering that itch under your skin so that when the story pivots, the relief hits harder. And this is where the pacing choice gets risky, in a way I actually kind of respect. The show spends time on the indignities. Not just one big humiliation montage and then, anyway, is powerful. It lets the social dynamic settle. It shows you how people get comfortable treating someone badly. That's not fun, but it's effective. Because cruelty in real life rarely looks like one dramatic slap. It looks like 1,000 tiny permissions. Here's what I kept leaning forward for: does the drama understand the difference between strength and secrecy? Because being a hidden savior is cool on paper. It's mythic. But secrecy can also become a crutch. If you're always hidden, you never have to negotiate like a normal person. You never have to be vulnerable. You never have to risk being rejected for who you are instead of for who they think you are. And the show teases that tension like it knows exactly what it's doing. Performance-wise, the actor playing Sion has to do a very annoying job. He has to be interesting while being quiet. That's hard. That's the kind of role where if your micro-expressions aren't calibrated, you either look dead-eyed or you look like you're overacting with your eyebrows. And what I liked here is that his stillness has texture. You can see decisions happening behind his eyes. You can see the moment he chooses peace over ego, and it doesn't read like weakness, it reads like someone who's counting costs. Cersei's performance, meanwhile, is all about the blade wrapped in silk. The drama doesn't make her loud. It makes her precise. Her cruelty, when it shows up, feels like it comes from a place of certainty. And certainty is scary. Because you can argue with anger. You can't argue with someone who thinks the world already agrees with them. I need to talk about the title for a second because it's so on the nose it almost dares you to take it seriously. Loser ex-husband. Like, okay, calm down. But that bluntness actually becomes a thematic weapon. The drama is obsessed with labels. Who gets called great? Who gets called useless? Who gets credited? Who gets erased? It's basically asking, if everyone agrees you're nothing, how long until you start performing nothing, just to survive the room? And I'll admit something kind of personal here. I've been in situations, not marriage, not this melodramatic, but in work and relationships where you realize you're being valued for what you provide, not who you are. And it messes with you because you start editing yourself. You start shrinking your own needs because you don't want to be difficult. Watching Sion navigate that was weirdly activating. Like I caught myself holding my breath during scenes that weren't even action-heavy, just emotionally suffocating. You know what else the drama does that's sneaky effective? It uses public versus private like a pressure cooker. Even in the early stretch, there's this sense that Sion is being managed like an image. Like his role is not partner, it's prop. And when you're a prop, your humanity becomes inconvenient. The way the camera frames gatherings, again, keeping it general, often places him slightly off-center, slightly behind, like the composition itself is telling you who matters. And then we get to the inciting fracture that the storyline spells out. Cersei coldly casts him out. I'm staying light here, so I won't over-describe the exact staging, but the emotional logic is what matters. That act isn't just betrayal. It's also permission. It's her saying, I no longer need the thing you were doing that you weren't allowed to name. Which is why his response, divorce, withdrawal of protection, doesn't feel like petty revenge. It feels like physics. And tell me you didn't feel it too. The moment someone who's been giving silently finally stops, the silence becomes deafening. Suddenly everyone notices what was missing. Not because they appreciate you, but because the machine starts breaking. What really kept me watching wasn't even the public debut angle yet, even though the storyline promises that feast. It was the emotional suspense of waiting for Sion to choose himself without turning into a caricature. Because there's a version of this story that's just power fantasy, he walks in, snaps his fingers, everyone cries, roll credits. And there's a version that's actually about dignity, what it costs to reclaim your life after you've built it around being unacknowledged. The drama's dialogue texture helps a lot here. People don't always say the mean thing directly. They say it sideways. They imply it. They ask questions that aren't questions. They forget him in conversation. It's that social violence that's deniable, which makes it more infuriating. And Sion's lines, when he does speak, often have that double meaning of someone who's biting down on truth so hard it tastes like blood. Sorry, that sounded poetic. I promise I'm not trying to audition for a novelist job. It's just what it feels like. There's also an interesting class and power undercurrent. Being a live-in husband in this context isn't framed as cozy domesticity. It's framed like a hierarchy. Like he's in the house, but he's not of the house. And the show uses that to make you feel how dependence can be weaponized. If the roof over your head is tied to someone else's approval, love starts to look like compliance. Let me ask you this, because it's where the first part of the drama either hooks you or loses you. Do you believe Sion's promise was love, or was it penance? Because if it's love, you watch him with tenderness. If it's penance, you watch him with dread, waiting for the moment he finally realizes he's been punishing himself on someone else's behalf. Visually, the drama keeps a polished, almost chilly palette in the humiliated husband era, at least that's how it felt to me. Clean interiors, sharp lines, a sense that everything is curated. And that choice works because it makes the emotional mess feel even uglier. When the world looks pristine, cruelty stands out like a stain nobody wants to acknowledge. Editing-wise, it's not hyperactive. It lets scenes breathe, sometimes to an uncomfortable degree. And I can already hear a few of you saying, that's slow. Sometimes it is. But it's slow with intention. It's the slowness of waiting for someone to finally snap, the way a kettle takes forever until suddenly it doesn't. There's a moment early on, again, staying general, where you can see Sion register something unfair happening, and the drama chooses not to cut away quickly. It holds on his reaction. The tiniest flinch. The smallest tightening at the corner of his mouth. And it's so human. It's not the big, I will have revenge, glare. It's the look of someone realizing, for the 100th time, that nobody in the room is going to stand up for him. And that's where the show earns its later fireworks, because it makes the quiet suffering feel specific, not generic. I do want to talk about the music because it's doing a lot of invisible labor. The score doesn't constantly scream, sad. It often sits under the scene like a low pulse, more tension than tears. And when it does swell, it's usually to underline a shift in power, not just to tell you what emotion to feel. That's a smarter choice than people give these dramas credit for. When the music is too manipulative, you resist it. Here, it's more like it's holding your hand while you walk through something uncomfortable. Okay. But does the show ever risk making Sion too perfect? A little. That's one of my mixed feelings. Because when a character endures humiliation for 3 years and stays morally clean the whole time, it can start to feel like a saint simulator. And saints are hard to relate to. I wanted more mess sometimes. More pettiness. More moments where he almost says the wrong thing, almost makes a selfish choice, almost lets anger win. Not because I want him to be bad, but because I want him to be fully human. At the same time, the drama does sprinkle in hints that he's not just a wounded puppy. There's competence under the restraint. You feel it in how he moves through spaces, how he watches people, how he doesn't react the way a truly powerless person would. And that becomes its own kind of tension. If he's capable, then every humiliation is, in part, chosen. And that's complicated. That's interesting. And then there's the promise of the public debut, where Sion exposes those who stole his credit. Even saying that out loud scratches the itch. This drama is clearly designed to scratch. But what matters to me, as a viewer, is not just whether he exposes them. It's what it costs him to finally be seen. Because being seen isn't just applause. It's also scrutiny. It's also losing the moral high ground of silence. It's also admitting you wanted recognition all along. If you're new to this kind of drama, here's the emotional contract it's offering you. We're going to make you sit in injustice long enough that justice feels like oxygen. That's the craft challenge. If it drags, you get numb. If it rushes, you don't care. And in the early stretch, I think it mostly balances that line, even if a few scenes linger a bit longer than they need to. There's a tiny, almost funny thing I caught myself doing while watching. This is my self-aware aside, where I'd be like, okay, Sion, just say one sentence. One. Literally one. And then he wouldn't, and I'd get mad, and then I'd realize the show had successfully turned me into the impatient friend in the corner who thinks emotional boundaries are just a motivational quote away. So humbling. One more angle that makes this drama stickier than it looks, the idea of protection as love. Sion is protecting Cersei's family, apparently, and that protection is invisible until it's gone. That's such a real dynamic. People don't thank you for the disasters that didn't happen. They only notice when the roof caves in. And there's something quietly tragic about building your life around being an unseen shield. Here's the next question that hooked me deeper than the revenge promise. When Sion withdraws, is he doing it to punish them, or to save himself? Because those are not the same. One is vengeance. The other is survival. And the drama's emotional credibility depends on which one it commits to, even if it keeps the surface level regret arc intact. As the setup rolls forward, you can feel the story tightening like a knot. The humiliation era can't last forever. The cast-out moment changes the geometry of every relationship. The people who used to feel safe treating him like nothing now have to react to an absence that suddenly has teeth. And what I found myself watching for wasn't the big confrontation itself, it was the little shifts in how characters speak when they realize the ground under them isn't guaranteed anymore. Because that's where this drama can either be deliciously satisfying or a little too easy. Does regret arrive like a thunderbolt, or does it creep in like nausea? Does Cersei's world crack because she suddenly has empathy, or because consequences finally show up with a receipt? And the way the early episodes position her coldness makes me think the show wants regret to be bitter, not clean. The thing about a hidden savior narrative is that it's inherently theatrical. It's built for reveal scenes, for "you thought I was nothing" moments, for a crowd turning their heads. And I'm telling you right now, the drama is already laying the track for that kind of spectacle in the way it frames Sion's restraint. It's winding the spring. So when we move from the cramped emotional politics of the home into the wider public arena the storyline hints at, the real test becomes this: can the show keep its human texture when it starts serving the audience payback? Or does it turn into a highlight reel of gotchas? That's where my mixed stance lives, honestly. I love the emotional setup. I'm invested. I'm also wary of how quickly these stories can start treating side characters like bowling pins. And yet, there's a reason I kept clicking next. The drama knows how to make you feel the cost of being dismissed. It doesn't just tell you Sion was humiliated. It makes you feel the social air of it. The silence after a rude comment. The way no one meets his eyes. The way respect is rationed like currency. In the next stretch, what really matters is how the show handles the shift from endurance to action, because that's where character becomes choice, not circumstance. And that's where this story either becomes a cheap fantasy or a genuinely satisfying reclaiming of self. And I can't get over how the early episodes quietly set up that pivot not as a glow-up, but as a severing, like cutting a rope you've been holding onto so long your hands forgot what unbruised skin feels like. What I want to dig into next is the relationship chemistry, how Sion and Cersei's scenes change when he's no longer asking for a place in her world, but deciding whether she deserves one in his, and how the drama's directing choices start shifting the power visually in ways you might not notice at first until suddenly you do, and you realize the show's been moving the camera like a chess piece the whole time. Because once you start noticing it, you can't unsee it. The show begins with Sion often shot like he's an accessory to someone else's life, and then, little by little, the lens stops treating him like background. Not in a flashy, hero shot way at first. More like the camera finally grants him the dignity of being centered, of being the person the scene is actually about, even when he's not talking. That's a directorial decision that basically whispers, yeah, okay, we're done pretending he doesn't matter. And that shift matters most in the scenes with Cersei, because their relationship isn't just romance gone rotten. It's a negotiation over reality. Early on, Cersei's presence has this gravity that makes everyone else orbit her, including Sion. She doesn't have to raise her voice, the room adjusts to her. And Sion, by staying quiet, almost becomes a mirror. Her coldness looks even colder reflected in someone who refuses to perform a reaction that would justify it. Here's the tricky part, the drama is constantly playing two different kinds of intimacy against each other. There's the intimacy of familiarity, of living in the same space for years, where you know someone's habits and rhythms. And then there's the intimacy of actual emotional access, where you know what they're afraid of, what they want, what they can't say out loud. Sion and Cersei have the first kind. The second kind is either missing or buried. And the show uses that absence like a wound you keep touching to see if it still hurts. There's a moment in the early to mid stretch, keeping it broad, don't worry, where you can feel Cersei testing a boundary. Not screaming. Not even overtly cruel. Just pushing with a sentence that has a little hook in it, like she's tossing a line to see if he'll bite. And Sion's response is so controlled that it almost reads as indifference. Almost. But the actor does this tiny thing with his eyes, like he's looking past her shoulder at a version of her that used to exist, and for half a second you can tell he's not numb. He's choosing numbness. Tell me that's not the most dangerous kind of love story. Not the one where people fight because they care too much. The one where one person keeps choosing emotional anesthesia because feeling the full thing would destroy them. And if you're sitting there thinking, okay, but why do I care about Cersei at all if she's cold? That's exactly what the drama dares you to ask. Because the easy pleasure is watching her get hit with consequences. The harder, more interesting pleasure is watching how someone becomes the kind of person who can throw away a loyal partner and sleep at night. The show doesn't excuse her, but it does build a little psychological architecture around her that makes her choices feel intentional instead of random villainy. Now, I'm still keeping spoilers light, but we can talk structure. This is not a mystery where you're collecting clues to solve a puzzle. This is a pressure narrative. You're watching a system, Cersei's family, their social standing, the people who benefit from Sion's silence, operate smoothly because one person is absorbing the cost. The tension comes from waiting for the system to lose that shock absorber. And the drama is very aware of how people talk when they think they're safe. That's one of the most accurate things here. The entitlement isn't always shouted. It's in the casual assumptions. It's in, obviously you'll do it. It's in tasks handed over like they're his natural job. It's in the way gratitude is treated like an optional accessory instead of a basic human reflex. Let me rehook you with something that genuinely made me lean in. What happens to a person's identity when they've been treated like a nobody for so long that being respected feels unfamiliar? Because the show isn't just aiming for revenge is sweet. It's also aiming for the weird emotional hangover that comes when the world finally acknowledges you and you don't know where to put all that attention. That's where Sion's arc, at least in how it's staged, gets more layered than it looks from the title. He's not simply humiliated, then powerful. He's humiliated, then forced to decide what kind of power he wants. Does he want spectacle? Does he want justice? Does he want to be understood? Those are different cravings. And the drama keeps teasing them as separate, sometimes conflicting motivations. One thing I appreciated is how the show visually distinguishes private cruelty from public performance. In private, the scenes tend to feel tighter, more controlled, like the air is stale. In more public spaces, there's a different energy, brighter lights, sharper sound, a sense that everyone is acting. And that matters because Cersei, in particular, reads like someone who understands public perception as a survival tool. Her composure feels curated. Sion, on the other hand, feels like someone who's been forced into curation and is tired of it. And when you get those moments where he's alone, just alone, not speaking, not being the husband, not being the loser, not being the savior, you can feel the drama trying to show you the person underneath the roles. I'm going to do a quick, vivid mini-scene retelling that stays safely within the premise, because it's one of those moments where you can feel the whole show in a single beat. Picture a polished interior, the kind of place where every surface looks expensive and cold to the touch. There's movement in the background, people doing their thing, talking, existing like the world belongs to them. Sion stands slightly apart. The sound is this soft blend of footsteps and murmurs, but the mix subtly favors the voices that dismiss him. He's handed something to do, like it's his obligation. The camera sits at a median distance, just far enough that you feel his isolation, and then it slowly inches closer. Not dramatic. Just steady. And Sion's face does almost nothing, which is the point. The actor lets the humiliation land in his throat, not his eyebrows. A swallow. A blink. A breath in that stops halfway. Then he moves, and it's like watching someone choose to be smaller so the room can keep being comfortable. That's the kind of scene that doesn't sound exciting on paper but lands emotionally because it's so recognizable. And here's where my mixed stance starts to show its teeth a little. Sometimes the drama leans too hard on repetition to make its point. You get multiple variations of Sion is undervalued that start to blur together. I get why they do it, the later payoff needs a foundation, but there were stretches where I thought, okay, I believe you. Move the story forward. The difference between tension and drag is often just one scene too many. But then, when it does move, it moves with purpose. The divorce and the withdrawal of protection, as an emotional pivot, is not treated like a single mic drop moment. It's treated like the beginning of a vacuum. And vacuums make people do desperate things. That's where the drama's social dynamics get interesting, not because everyone suddenly becomes self-aware, but because self-interest kicks in. The credit theft angle is also quietly brutal. Because stealing credit isn't just taking praise. It's taking someone's narrative. It's saying, your efforts will exist, but your name won't. And the storyline promises that Sion exposes those who stole his credit at his public debut, which is the kind of thing these dramas live for. Even staying light, we can talk about how the show sets that up. It plants the idea of a public record, a visible stage, and the fear people have of being exposed in front of witnesses. The drama understands something basic about humiliation: it's rarely enough to confront someone privately. People who humiliate you often don't fear your feelings. They fear losing face. They fear the crowd turning. They fear the story being told without them controlling it. And that's why the public debut matters thematically. It's not just, Sion shows up looking cool. It's, the narrative changes ownership. Now, I want to talk about masculinity in this drama, because it's doing a thing that can either be thoughtful or a little retro depending on how you read it. The show frames Sion's endurance as both strength and tragedy. He's the man who can take it. He can swallow insult. He can keep a promise even when it costs him dignity. That's a very classic, almost old-school heroic framing. And it's effective. But it also carries a risk: it can romanticize self-erasure as virtue. Here's my respectful contrarian take. Part 2. The most heroic thing Sion does isn't staying for 3 years. It's leaving. And not leaving with fireworks, not leaving to prove a point, but leaving because he finally accepts that loyalty without reciprocity is just slow self-harm. That's not a flashy message, but it's a real one. If you've ever been someone who prides yourself on being the dependable one, you know what I mean. You can turn reliability into a cage. You can keep saying yes because it makes you feel valuable. And then you look up and realize people don't love you. They love the convenience. Watching Sion wrestle with that, often without dialogue spelling it out, hit me harder than I expected. Let me rehook you again, because this is where the show gets sneaky. When Sion withdraws protection, we're supposed to cheer because it hurts them, or feel uneasy because it proves how much power he had the whole time. Because that second feeling is complicated. If he could protect them all along, then his silence wasn't just suffering. It was control through restraint. And I'm not saying he's wrong for it. I'm saying it adds a morally interesting edge. The drama's sound design supports that unease. In scenes where Sion is invisible, the audio is often busy, life goes on around him. In scenes where his agency begins to return, you start hearing more deliberate sonic space. A pause. A breath. Footsteps that sound heavier. Doors that sound more final. It's subtle, but it's there, and it's part of what makes the story feel like it's shifting gears even before the plot announces it. Acting-wise, I keep coming back to how the performers handle status. This is a status drama. Every glance is a rank check. Every line delivery is a flex or a concession. The supporting characters, again, staying general because the storyline doesn't specify who's who, tend to play like people who are used to being right. They speak in certainties. They don't ask questions, they deliver verdicts. And when Sion stops playing his assigned role, you can see them scrambling for a new script. Cersei's performance in these shifting moments is key. The drama gives her this crisp exterior, but when that exterior is challenged, the interesting question becomes, does she crack emotionally or strategically? Some shows go for tears and remorse. This one, at least in how it feels early to mid, seems more interested in pride. Regret isn't just sadness, it's humiliation in reverse. It's realizing you misjudged someone and now you can't undo it without admitting you were wrong. And oh, this drama loves regret. It doesn't just want regret as punishment. It wants regret as a mirror. It wants the people who dismissed Sion to see themselves the way they actually are. Which is why the bitter regret in the storyline doesn't read like a neat moral lesson. It reads like a long, sour aftertaste. I'll be honest, there were moments where the show's desire for catharsis edged close to cruelty. Like it wanted the audience to savor suffering a little too much. And I had to check myself, because I was enjoying the fantasy of consequences, and then I'd think, wait, what is this doing to my brain? I'm not clutching pearls. I'm just saying, revenge narratives can turn you into someone who applauds pain as long as it's aimed at the right people. That's where the drama's best scenes pull you back. They remind you that the cost isn't just to the people who regret. It's also to Sion. Because reclaiming your story doesn't automatically heal you. Sometimes it just gives you a new kind of loneliness. If everyone only respects you when you're powerful, what does that say about the love you thought you had? Let's talk about pacing again, but from a different angle. The show alternates between slow burn humiliation and sharper, more kinetic shifts when the social order wobbles. That alternation can feel addictive because it mimics emotional reality, long stretches of endurance, then sudden moments of rupture. Where it occasionally stumbles is when it holds too long on reaction shots that are meant to be satisfying, like it's waiting for you to clap. And I get it. This genre thrives on reaction shots. But the best reaction shots are earned, not milked. Visually, I also noticed how wardrobe and posture do storytelling. Sion's look, without me getting too specific, often feels intentionally understated in the live-in husband phase. Not sloppy, just muted. Like he's trying not to take up space. And as his agency returns, the show doesn't necessarily throw him into a fashion montage. It adjusts him in smaller ways, cleaner lines, more deliberate presence, a straighter spine. It's not glow up. It's no longer apologizing. And yes, I'm aware I'm talking about posture like I'm grading a dance performance. I can hear myself. But in a drama like this, posture is dialogue. The body speaks when the script keeps the hero quiet. Now, because we're keeping spoilers light, I'm not going to detail the mechanics of the public debut exposure. But I can talk about what the drama is clearly building toward in terms of staging an emotional payoff. It's setting up a contrast between how Sion was perceived in private domestic spaces and how he will be perceived when the audience gets involved. The public is a character in these stories. The crowd is the courtroom. And the most satisfying thing about public exposure isn't just truth, it's witness. If you've ever had something unfair happen to you behind closed doors, you know how crazy-making it is. You can't prove it. You sound dramatic if you try. People shrug. Are you sure? So when a story promises public witnessing, it's not just about humiliating the bad guys. It's about validating the victim. That's why these reveals feel so potent. They are not only revenge. They are reality being acknowledged. Here's another question to keep you leaning in. When Sion finally stands in the light, does he do it for himself, or does he do it to make Cersei see him? Because those motivations can coexist, and the drama is at its best when it admits that. Wanting someone who hurt you to finally understand is such a human impulse. It's also a trap. If your healing depends on your enemy's comprehension, you're still giving them power. The show toys with that trap in the way it writes their dialogue. When Cersei speaks to Sion, there's often an assumption baked into her phrasing that she sets the terms. Even when she's wrong, she sounds like she thinks she's right. And Sion's silence becomes its own refusal. He doesn't accept her premise. Later, when he begins to speak more, again, speaking generally, what changes isn't just volume. It's framework. He stops arguing within her worldview. That's what boundaries look like in dialogue. Not, you hurt me. More like, you don't get to define me. And I want to give credit to the editing when it comes to that dialogue framework. The show is good at cutting to listening faces. Not just the speaker. It wants you to watch the moment words land. It's obsessed with impact. Sometimes that obsession slows things down, but when it works, it makes power shifts feel physical. We also need to talk about the promise itself, because it's the moral anchor and the psychological cage. The show doesn't over-explain it early, which is smart. It lets it function like a shadow. You understand enough, Sion is staying because he made a promise and because he's protecting Cersei's family. But because the promise is vague, it becomes a container for your own assumptions. You project onto it. Is it romantic? Is it duty? Is it guilt? The drama uses that ambiguity to keep Sion a little mysterious without making him unreadable. But ambiguity is a double-edged sword. Too much, and the character feels like an idea instead of a person. The show combats that by giving Sion small, human rhythms. The way he pauses before speaking. The way he looks away. The way he stands at the edge of rooms. It's not just, sad man. It's, man who's learned not to expect space. I'll throw in another personal confession, because I felt this in my chest watching. There's a particular kind of loneliness when you're physically present but emotionally unacknowledged. Like you're in the room, contributing, smiling, doing the thing, and yet you could disappear and nobody would change their tone. The drama captures that, and it reminded me of times I stayed too long in situations because leaving felt like admitting I'd been wrong to hope. That's what Sion's endurance made me think about, how hope can become stubbornness, and stubbornness can become self-neglect. And because I'm me, I also had the petty viewer impulse of wanting Sion to get one scene where he's just casually respected. Like someone hands him a cup of tea and says thank you and means it. Not as a grand apology, just as basic decency. The fact that I wanted that so badly tells you the show successfully starved me. Let's talk themes, because this drama is basically a sermon about credit. Who gets it? Who deserves it? Who hoards it? Credit in romance, credit in family, credit in public achievement. The phrase, stole his credit, is doing heavy lifting. It's not just about recognition, it's about moral theft. It's about stealing someone's identity as the doer, the protector, the savior. And when someone steals credit, it doesn't just rob the victim. It corrupts the thief. Because now the thief has to keep lying to maintain their position. They have to build a whole personality around an achievement that isn't theirs. That's why exposure stories are so satisfying, they collapse that false self in one hit. The best version of this drama uses that collapse not just for laughs, but as a look at how fragile status really is. Rehook time, because if you're still with me, you deserve the juiciest angle. What if the tragedy isn't that Cersei didn't know Sion's worth, it's that she only learns it when it becomes socially expensive to ignore? That's the bleakest interpretation, and it's the one that would make this story sting instead of just satisfy. Now, weak spots. Aside from occasional pacing drag, there's a risk of emotional monotony. If every scene is some variation of dismissal, the show can flatten its emotional palette. The way it avoids that, most of the time, is by changing the type of dismissal. Sometimes it's overt contempt. Sometimes it's polite exclusion. Sometimes it's manipulation framed as care. Those are different flavors of harm, and the drama does a decent job of rotating them so you don't go numb. The cinematography also deserves a nod for using distance as storytelling. In scenes where Sion is being treated like an outsider, the camera often keeps a bit of space between him and others, making him feel isolated even when he's in a crowd. When the story begins to shift, you get more intimate framing. It's not just style, it's narrative alignment. The camera starts taking his side. And I want to emphasize that because newcomers to this genre sometimes think these shows are all dialogue and plot twists. But the good ones, the ones that stick, doing invisible work with framing and rhythm. They are shaping your emotional loyalties. Okay, let's linger on Cersei one more time, because she's the axis that drama spins around. The show makes her coldness legible, but it also makes it a choice. And the most interesting thing about her isn't the cruelty, it's the certainty. People who are uncertain can be reasoned with. People who are certain will burn bridges just to prove they are right. There's also an undercurrent of image management that's very modern. Cersei's world seems to reward performance, looking strong, looking right, looking untouchable. In a world like that, admitting you were wrong isn't just emotional vulnerability. It's social suicide. So even if she feels something, the question becomes whether she can afford to show it. And here's where the drama's title becomes almost ironic. Great Savior is not just about Sion. It's about what society wants from saviors. It wants them humble. It wants them silent. It wants them grateful for the opportunity to serve. The moment a savior wants credit, the moment a savior wants respect, people start calling them selfish. The drama is poking at that hypocrisy, even if it sometimes does it with a sledgehammer. I also noticed how the show uses silence as threat later on, in a way that's honestly kind of chilling. Early, Sion's silence is survival. Later, silence becomes leverage. And that's such a smart evolution because it shows that the same behavior can mean different things depending on who holds power. And that's the big craft question moving forward: does Sion become someone who can't stop using leverage once he has it? Because once you've been powerless, power can feel like oxygen. You can get addicted to never being dismissed again. The drama sets up that temptation, and I'm really curious how it continues to handle it without turning Sion into either a saint or a tyrant. There's a particular kind of scene that this drama is very good at, the almost confrontation. The scene where you think someone's finally going to say the thing, and then they don't. They say something adjacent. They retreat into politeness. They weaponize calm. Those scenes can be frustrating, but they also feel real, because real life is full of unsaid words. And the show uses those unsaid words as narrative fuel. You can feel them accumulating. And because I'm keeping it light, I'm not going to go into the specifics of who gets exposed and how. But I will say, the drama positions Sion's public debut not just as a plot event, but as a performance in the theatrical sense. The world is watching, and that changes what truth means. Truth becomes something you deliver, not just something you know. That's why I'm so interested in the way the show handles gaze. Who's looking at Sion? Who's refusing to? Who's suddenly staring when the status changes? The gaze is the currency here. Being seen is power. Being ignored is punishment. Being watched is a threat. And maybe the most quietly heartbreaking part is that Sion has spent years being unseen, so even when the gaze finally turns toward him, it might not feel like comfort. It might feel like exposure. Like vulnerability. Like being under a microscope after years of being under a rug. If you want a drama that makes you feel smart for noticing subtle shifts, this one does reward attention. Not in a complicated plot way, but in an emotional choreography way. Who stands where? Who speaks first? Who gets interrupted? Who gets the last word? Those microdynamics are the real story. One last little humorous aside before I get too intense: there were moments where I wanted to reach through the screen, grab certain characters by the collar, and be like, "Do you hear yourself?" And then I'd remember half the time when people are being casually cruel, they genuinely do not hear themselves. That's the whole problem. So as the story keeps progressing from domestic humiliation into public reckoning, the tension isn't just, will Sion expose them? The tension is, what kind of man does Sion become when he no longer has to swallow everything? Because swallowing everything for 3 years changes you. Even if you're morally strong. Even if you're disciplined. You don't come out untouched. And the drama is at its best when it remembers that. When it doesn't treat his transformation as a costume change, but as a psychological shift with scars. When it lets him be quiet in a new way, quiet not because he's trapped, but because he's choosing. The next thing I want to get into is how the show uses public spaces as emotional battlegrounds, how the editing starts to emphasize reaction chains like dominoes, and how the score subtly changes from tension under glass to something more declarative. This is a turning point, because the way it stages those crowd energy moments is where the drama either becomes peak catharsis or slips into cartoonish spectacle. And there's one particular kind of sequence it leans into that I have very specific feelings about, especially when it comes to how it frames regret as entertainment rather than as consequence, because those are not the same thing, and the line between them is thinner than people think when the camera starts hunting for the most humiliating angle. And that's where my relationship with this drama gets complicated in the most interesting way, because the show is absolutely aware that it's feeding you a certain appetite. It wants you to enjoy the reversal. It wants you to lean back like, finally. And then, if you're paying attention, it also wants you to notice what that enjoyment costs. When regret becomes entertainment, you start rooting for humiliation as a sport. You stop caring about repair. You stop caring about humanity. You just want the scoreboard. What I appreciated is that the drama doesn't always let you stay in that clean and complicated gotcha pleasure. Even without me spelling out later specifics, you can feel it in the way the show frames reactions. There are moments where the camera could hold on someone's face crumpling and practically invite you to savor it, and instead it cuts sooner than you expect, or it stays on Sion's expression rather than the target's embarrassment. That's a choice. It quietly shifts the emphasis from watch them suffer to watch him decide what kind of justice he's actually delivering. Because let's be real, exposing stolen credit is righteous, but it's also violent in its own way. It's social violence. It's taking someone's standing and snapping it in public. And sure, if they built that standing on a lie, consequences are consequences. But the drama is smarter when it acknowledges that public destruction is still destruction. Even deserved consequences have a temperature. Here's the rehook I couldn't shake in the middle stretch: is Sion reclaiming his life, or is he building a new prison out of other people's regret? Because there's a version of this story where the hero wins, but he's still emotionally chained to the people who wronged him. He just has the chain in his hand now. And that's why I kept watching the actor's choices so closely, especially in scenes where he has the upper hand. When Sion is powerless, you expect restraint. When he becomes powerful, restraint becomes character. It becomes ethics. And the performance does this really interesting thing where Sion's calm doesn't suddenly become smug. It stays measured. Sometimes almost tired. Like the satisfaction is there, but it's not filling the hole the way he thought it would. That's something revenge stories rarely admit, and when they do, they hit harder. Because you can get everything back, your name, your credit, your reputation, and still feel hollow. The trauma doesn't evaporate just because the world claps for you. If anything, applause can feel insulting when you remember how quiet everyone was when you needed basic decency. The public space battlegrounds you were asking me to talk about, because yes, this is where the drama starts flexing. It's not just big room, big reveal. It's how the room is arranged. The show loves staging people in clusters, like social alliances made visible. You'll see who stands close to who hangs back, who angles their body away from Sion as if proximity itself is a risk. It's almost like a dance of cowardice and curiosity. And Sion walking into those spaces, again, keeping it general, feels like a weather change. Everyone senses it. The air shifts. The editing starts emphasizing chain reactions. One person hears something. Their eyes flick. Someone else catches it. A whisper starts. A confident smirk falters. And the show cuts those micro-reactions together like dominoes tipping. That's the kind of editorial rhythm that makes social collapse feel kinetic without needing physical action. It becomes a thriller, but the weapon is reputation. And listen, I know how this sounds. I'm sitting here describing flicks like they're car chases. But if you've watched enough dramas, you know the difference between a scene that just tells you someone is embarrassed and a scene that makes you feel the embarrassment spreading across a crowd like heat. This show, when it's on, knows how to do the second one. The score changes too, and it's subtle at first. Early episodes carry that low, restrained tension, like everything is being held under a lid. As the stakes move into public spaces, the music becomes more declarative. Not necessarily louder, but clearer. More emphasis on beats that feel like decisions being made in real time. You can almost sense the composer shifting from endure to declare. And that's important because Sion's arc is essentially that, moving from endurance as identity to choice as identity. Now, let's talk about Cersei's regret, because the storyline promises her family ends in bitter regret, and that is a loaded phrase. Bitter regret isn't gentle. Bitter regret is not a soft apology over tea. Bitter regret is anger mixed with grief, humiliation mixed with denial. It's the feeling of wanting to go back in time while simultaneously refusing to admit you were wrong. It's a poison you drink because you can't put the cup down. And the drama is at its best when it lets Cersei be messy in that specific way. Not just, she feels bad now. But she can't reconcile the version of herself who dismissed him with the new reality where he's obviously significant. That cognitive dissonance is where good acting lies. It's in the way someone tries to speak with authority while their confidence is leaking out of the corners. The performance, again, I'm being careful not to invent details, suggests Cersei is not a character who collapses easily. If she crumbles, she does it in private. In public, she holds the mask. That mask becomes more tense as the story progresses, and you start watching her not for what she says but for when the mask slips. A fraction of a second too long before she answers. A jaw clench. The way she looks away like she's searching for an escape route that used to exist and now doesn't. Here's where I want to push a slightly uncomfortable interpretation. Cersei casting Sion out may not just be cruelty. It might be a power move born from fear. Fear of what he represents, fear of being indebted, fear of losing control. Because if Sion is truly a protector behind the scenes, then accepting him fully would mean admitting dependence. And some people would rather burn the bridge than admit they need it. That's not an excuse. It's a diagnosis. And diagnosing a character doesn't absolve them, it just makes the drama richer than bad wife gets punished. Another rehook, because I think this is the heart of why people either love or hate this kind of show. Do you want Sion to be emotionally free, or do you want him to win the scoreboard? Because those are different endings in spirit, even if they look similar on plot paper. And even if I can't talk endgame specifics, I can talk about the vibe the show is building. It's building toward scoreboard satisfaction. The question is whether it also smuggles in emotional freedom. One area where I think the drama sometimes undercuts itself is in how it paints the people around Sion as almost too conveniently blind. Credit theft, dismissal, humiliation, these things often require a whole community to participate, even passively. And the show leans into that, which is accurate. But when everyone is cruel in the same register, it can feel like the world exists just to set up the hero's comeback. I wanted more nuance in the side characters' moral textures. Not everyone who benefits from a system is conscious of it. Some are complicit, some are ignorant, some are trapped, some are cowardly. Those distinctions matter. When the drama does give you those distinctions, it pops. When you see a character hesitate, or you sense a flicker of guilt, suddenly the world feels less like a stage and more like a place. I always think revenge stories are more satisfying when there's at least one person in the system who could have done the right thing and didn't. That's the real heartbreak. Not the obvious villains. The almost good people. And Sion's reaction to those almost good people is where you learn what kind of man he's becoming. If he treats everyone as an enemy, he becomes a hammer. If he can differentiate, if he can see degrees of culpability, then his justice starts looking like maturity rather than rage. I also want to linger on the theme of promises, because the premise is to keep a promise, and that's not a neutral motivation. Promises can be sacred. Promises can be manipulation. Promises can be self-imposed chains we keep clinging to because they give our suffering meaning. If Sion's promise is the thing that kept him in that humiliating role, then the moment he breaks free is not only divorce. It's an identity crisis. Who is he without sacrifice? Who is he if he stops earning love through endurance? That question is what made the show feel sharper than the title suggests. Because loser ex-husband becomes savior could have been a mean plot. But man who built his identity on being needed learns to live without being used is actually kind of raw. There's a particular emotional beat the drama hits that I didn't expect to resonate, the idea that sometimes you don't even want the people who wronged you to apologize. You want them to understand. You want the apology to come from comprehension, not fear. And the cruel trick of public exposure is that it often produces apologies motivated by survival, not empathy. People say sorry when it benefits them. So when Sion steps into the public eye and starts telling the truth, again, speaking broadly, the drama is playing with that tension. Is the truth freeing because it's true, or is it hollow because the response it gets is performative? And that leads into the drama's obsession with performance itself. Everyone performs. Cersei performs strength. Her family performs superiority. The credit thieves perform competence. Even Sion, in his silence, performs harmlessness. The show is basically saying society runs on performance, and the people who refuse to perform get punished, until they find a stage that finally rewards them. But what is the public debut, if not a performance too? That's the paradox. Sion is stepping onto a stage and controlling the narrative. That's righteous, but it's also calculated. And I love that the drama doesn't fully hide the calculation. It makes Sion feel like someone who's thought through the timing. Who understands that truth without timing is just noise. Let me give the cinematography another moment, because it's doing quiet storytelling with lighting. In the humiliation-heavy segments, light often feels harsh in a sterile way, like it's exposing him without honoring him. Later, as the narrative shifts toward him owning his space, the lighting becomes more flattering, not glam, but more balanced. Less clinical. That's a mood adjustment that tells you the show is moving from "he is inspected" to "he is seen." Even the way rooms are shot changes. Earlier, rooms feel bigger than Sion. Later, Sion feels bigger than the room. That's not because he literally grows, obviously, it's lens choice, camera height, blocking. The director starts placing him in positions that imply authority, centered, foregrounded, with others reacting around him rather than him reacting around them. And you might think, okay, so it's just a power fantasy. But power fantasies can still be well made. The craft can be sharp even when the story is indulgent. And part of why I'm not dismissing this drama is because it tries to justify the indulgence emotionally. It doesn't just say, he's powerful. It says, he's powerful, and it's complicated, and it doesn't erase what happened. Now, I'm going to address something critics of this genre always bring up: why doesn't the hero just explain? Why hide? Why endure? In real life, you'd want communication. You'd want boundaries. You'd want therapy. This drama is not therapy. It's a heightened story about recognition and debt. It's mythic. It runs on the tension created by secrecy. But here's where the writing either earns your patience or wastes it. Does the secrecy feel like a character flaw with consequences, or does it feel like a plot device that magically makes the story possible? In the better stretches, it feels like a flaw. Sion's secrecy is not simply noble. It creates harm. It enables mistreatment. It allows thieves to thrive. It turns his protection into a silent weapon. That's messy. That's human. That's not just, the plot needed him to be quiet. And I know some of you want me to just say whether the show is satisfying, and we're not there yet, because the satisfaction here is in the build. It's in the way the drama makes you feel the weight of uncredited labor before it gives you the release of credit being restored. If it gave it to you too soon, it would be like eating dessert before the meal. Sweet, but empty. Rehook again, because I want you thinking about it the way I was. What if Sion's greatest saving isn't saving Cersei's family from external threats, but saving himself from the version of him that thought suffering was love. That's the quieter salvation, the one revenge can't give you. One of the most effective things the show does is let silence mean different things in different scenes. There's silence as endurance. Silence as contempt. Silence as grief. Silence as strategy. Silence as boundary. The actor playing Sion uses different stillness for each. Sometimes his stillness is soft, like his absorbing. Sometimes it's sharp, like his refusing. Sometimes it's heavy, like his mourning his own lost years. That's good work. And Cersei's silences are different too. Hers often read like calculation. Like she's choosing which version of herself to present. When she's silent, you feel her thinking about optics. That's consistent characterization. It makes her feel like someone who doesn't just react emotionally, she manages. The drama's dialogue also has a particular flavor I want to call out. A lot of power is exercised through understatement. People don't scream, they dismiss. They speak as if the conclusion is already agreed upon. That kind of dialogue can feel repetitive if overused, but it also accurately portrays how social hierarchies maintain themselves. The powerful speak like their opinions are facts. The powerless ask like their needs are requests. Sion's arc is partly about reversing that linguistic posture. He stops asking. He starts stating. Even small changes in sentence structure can make a character feel like they've reclaimed agency. And the show understands that. It's one of those details you might not consciously track, but you feel it. Now, do I have issues with how the drama sometimes positions humiliation as necessary to appreciate the hero? Yeah. That's a genre problem too. The danger is implying that dignity is only meaningful after degradation, which is not true, and it can be uncomfortable to watch when the humiliation scenes feel prolonged. There's a fine line between portraying suffering and indulging it. When I felt that line wobble, it was usually because the scene seemed to exist only to remind you he's undervalued, rather than to reveal a new facet of character or relationship. The best humiliation scenes are not interchangeable, each one should teach you something. If they don't, they start to feel like padding. But when the show uses humiliation to reveal something new, like a character's particular kind of cruelty, or Sion's particular coping mechanism, it becomes story, not just cruelty. Let's also talk about the protection aspect. The storyline says Sion withdraws all protection after the divorce. That implies his protection was real, active, and significant. And the show plays with the invisibility of that labor in a way that's almost like a metaphor for emotional labor. You do things to keep someone safe, stable, comfortable. They don't see it. They think the world is naturally kind to them. Then you stop, and suddenly their world feels hostile. It's a very pointed metaphor, and I think that's part of why people connect with this drama even if they roll their eyes at the title. It's not just about secret savior heroics. It's about invisible work. About how people normalize your effort until the day you're not there. And I want to say something that might make some viewers bristle. Sion withdrawing protection is also a form of boundary setting. People frame it as punishment, and sure, it functions that way. But if he was being used, if his protection was expected without respect, then withdrawing is him refusing to be exploited. The drama invites you to cheer it as revenge, but you can also read it as self-respect. That second reading is healthier, honestly. Now, about the public debut, again, because even without me spoiling the exact content, we can talk about why that moment is structurally essential. In a story where the hero is hidden, the reveal is not just plot. It's identity. It's the moment the character stops being an idea in other people's heads and becomes a fact. The reveal is also a recalibration of every relationship, because now everyone's previous behavior has to be re-evaluated in the new light. And that's why exposure scenes, when done right, are not just satisfying, they are reorganizing. They change the entire social map. People start switching sides. People start rewriting their own memories. People start pretending they always respected him. That's a fascinating and infuriating human behavior, and the show seems very interested in it. Because here's the ugly truth, a lot of people don't regret mistreating you because it was wrong. they regret it because it was a bad investment. They picked the wrong side. When the power shifts, their morality shifts with it. If the drama leans into that, it becomes a sharper critique. If it smooths it over with sudden sincere apologies, it becomes wish fulfillment. And I'm not going to lie, I have a taste preference. I prefer the bitter version. I prefer the drama to say, no, these people are not redeemed just because they got scared. That's more honest. That's more emotionally consistent with the 3 years of humiliation. Rehook again, what do you do with love when you realize it was built on a lie of your own making? Because Sion's love, if you interpret it as love, was partly built on staying hidden. On being the unsung shield. On being needed but not known. Once he steps into visibility, that love has to change shape or die. And that's not even about Cersei anymore. That's about Sion learning to accept love that doesn't require suffering. The drama is also quietly exploring pride. Sion's pride, Cersei's pride, the family's pride. Pride is what keeps apologies from happening. Pride is what keeps promises binding long past their expiration date. Pride is what makes people double down when they should soften. And pride, in this drama, is treated like a sickness. It keeps everyone trapped. I also want to credit the show's restraint in not making Sion's transformation purely aesthetic. Yes, there are visual cues of him becoming more centered, more deliberate, but it's not just, now he's hot and rich and everyone stares. The transformation is staged as psychological. He looks like someone who has stopped asking permission to exist. And that's why I keep coming back to the actor's eyes. The eyes are doing the story. Early on, his gaze is often downward or sideways, not submissive exactly, but guarded. Later, his gaze steadies. He looks people in the face longer. Not aggressively. Just without shrinking. That change is so simple and so satisfying because it's not a special effect. It's a human choice. There's also an interesting meta layer to the "stole his credit" theme if you think about how audiences consume stories. We love the idea of hidden genius revealed. We love thinking we can spot greatness early. We love saying, "I always knew." This drama plays into that fantasy and then shows you how shallow it can be. People didn't always know. They ignored him until it was convenient not to. Now, since you asked for the final part, this is usually where I'd start steering toward a verdict, but I'm not doing that yet because I'm not done chewing on what the drama is trying to say about regret itself. Regret in this story isn't portrayed as cleansing. It's not like characters regret and become better people and everything heals. Regret is portrayed as corrosive. It eats at relationships. It makes people desperate. It makes them manipulate. It makes them rewrite history. That's a more realistic portrayal than the tidy, everyone learns a lesson, route. And from a writing standpoint, it's a strong choice because it keeps the stakes alive even after the reveal. A lot of hidden identity stories peak at the reveal and then struggle to maintain tension. The loser ex-husband is the great savior has a built-in engine after the reveal, the social aftermath. The scramble. The bargaining. The regret. The attempt to regain what was lost. And the most interesting part of Aftermath is not punishment. It's negotiation. People don't just accept consequences. They negotiate them. They try to minimize loss. They try to extract forgiveness. They try to make the victim responsible for their redemption. And if the drama goes there, again, speaking in generalities, it becomes more than a revenge snack. It becomes a look at how accountability is avoided. One thing I want to see, and I'm saying this as a viewer who likes nuance, is whether Sion ever confronts his own complicity in being hidden. Not blame. Not, it's his fault. But accountability to himself. I allowed this. I stayed. I enabled it. That's a hard thing to admit, and it's also a crucial step in not repeating the pattern. If the drama lets him have that moment, internally, quietly, it elevates the story. Because otherwise, the narrative risks implying that the solution to being mistreated is simply becoming powerful enough that people can't mistreat you anymore. That's not a solution. That's armor. And armor is useful, but it's not healing. Rehook, because I want to keep you emotionally engaged, not just intellectually. What if the real fantasy isn't revenge, it's being valued without having to prove you're valuable? That's the fantasy underneath all of this. And that's why the scenes where Sion is simply respected, when they happen, land like water in a desert. Not because they are flashy, but because they represent a world where his worth is not up for debate. The show understands that hunger. Now, craft again, the drama's use of timing is one of its strongest weapons. It withholds information. It withholds reactions. It withholds praise. It makes you wait. That waiting builds emotional pressure. The risk is that it can frustrate viewers who want quicker gratification. But if you're the kind of viewer who likes your catharsis earned, the slow build can be delicious. There's also a tonal tightrope. The title is almost comedic in its bluntness, but the story often plays like melodrama with serious emotional stakes. That could create whiplash if mishandled. The show mostly avoids whiplash by keeping the emotional tone consistent even when the premise is outrageous. It commits. It asks you to commit with it. I do think that drama occasionally flirts with making certain antagonistic figures too obviously evil, which can reduce tension because you stop wondering what they'll do. You know they'll do the worst thing. The more interesting antagonists are the ones who can justify themselves. The ones who believe they are right. The ones who can almost convince you for a second. When the writing leans into that, it's stronger. And I want to say something about empathy, because I can already imagine some viewers thinking that any attempt to understand Cersei is defending her. It's not. Understanding is how you make a story feel real. A character who is simply cruel is boring. A character who is cruel because of fear, pride, insecurity, or social conditioning is still responsible, but they are also human. And humans are scarier than cartoons because humans exist. The show, in the way it stages Cersei's coldness, suggests she's been rewarded for it. Coldness reads as competence in certain environments. Distance reads as authority. If she's from a world where softness is punished, her coldness becomes a survival strategy. Again, not an excuse. A context. Now, Sion's great savior identity, hidden or not, is also a context. Saviors tend to develop a complex. They start believing their value is in rescuing. They start believing love is earned through protection. That can create a dynamic where they tolerate mistreatment because the rescue itself validates them. If the drama is truly thoughtful, it will interrogate that savior complex. It will show that being a savior can be a way of avoiding vulnerability. Because vulnerability is what Sion has been dodging for 3 years. Not emotional vulnerability in the sense of crying. I mean the vulnerability of saying, I want to be loved as I am, not as what I provide. That's the scariest sentence in the world for people who've been used. The drama also plays with the idea of legitimacy. Credit is legitimacy. Public acknowledgement is legitimacy. When you're hidden, you're illegitimate, even if you're doing everything. The public debut is a claim to legitimacy. I exist. I matter. My name belongs here. That's why it's satisfying. It's not just revenge. It's existential. Okay, I'm going to stop right here for a second because I can feel myself getting pulled toward wrapping this up, and I'm not ready to wrap it up. There's still so much to unpack about the way the show weaponizes regret, the way it frames Sion's silence as both trauma response and strategy, and the way the credit theft theme intersects with love. Because if you think about it, romance itself is a kind of credit economy in these stories, where affection is given to the person who seems most valuable, and when the true value is revealed, everyone tries to rebalance the books. But love doesn't work like bookkeeping, and that mismatch is where the real emotional damage lies, especially when the people who wronged you try to buy forgiveness with sudden respect, and you have to decide whether respect that arrives late is still respect or just fear dressed up in manners. And that mismatch is where the drama's tension keeps regenerating, because even when Sion starts getting the respect he was denied, you can feel the story asking, okay, but what does respect even mean if it only shows up when you're useful to fear? It's like the show is dangling two possible emotional endings in front of you at the same time. One ending is the fantasy ending where everyone learns the lesson and Sion is finally valued. The other ending is the more bruised ending where Sion realizes value that arrives late is not the same thing as love, and he has to decide whether he wants to live in a world of compensation or a world of connection. There's a scene type the drama uses again and again that really captures this, and it's not even about plot. It's about social temperature. You'll get a moment where Sion enters a space and the conversation doesn't stop, but it changes pitch. People become suddenly careful, suddenly polite, suddenly interested. And the camera doesn't need to underline it with slow motion or dramatic zooms. It just sits there and lets you notice the shift the way you notice it in real life, like when you walk into a room and everyone's friendliness is 2 degrees too bright, too rehearsed. That's not warmth. That's performance. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of that kind of warmth, you know it can make you feel lonelier than outright rejection, because at least rejection is honest. Performative warmth is like being hugged by someone who's checking whether anyone's watching. Here's a thought that kept turning in my head as the show leaned harder into its savior identity. There's a way public respect can become just another form of humiliation, because it proves that your private self was never enough. That's a nasty little emotional paradox, and the drama brushes right up against it. It doesn't always stop to articulate it, but you feel it in Sion's expression when attention turns toward him. Not joy. Not pure satisfaction. More like a man tasting something sweet and realizing it's mixed with bitterness he can't quite separate. Rehook me with this: if someone only believes you when the crowd believes you, do they believe you, or do they believe the crowd? That question is why I keep calling this drama more psychologically interesting than its blunt title suggests. It's not just about being powerful. It's about who gets to define reality. Early on, Cersei's family and social circle define reality. Sion is a loser, therefore he is. Later, Sion reclaims the power to define reality publicly. And the story's real conflict becomes, does he want to win their reality, or does he want to exit it entirely? Because exiting is the real flex. Exposure is still engagement. It's still playing the game, just with better cards. Exiting is refusing the game. The show's craft choices keep reinforcing this idea of game. The way scenes are staged often resembles a negotiation table, even when it's domestic. People angle themselves like they're in a boardroom, not a home. Dialogue lands like contracts being rewritten. And Sion's promise, the thing that kept him there for 3 years, functions like an unspoken contract he refuses to break until he's forced to face the question of whether keeping it is worth losing himself. And that's where my mixed stance keeps coming up. I love the emotional concept. I love the sense of suffocation. I love the social critique. I don't always love how the drama sometimes treats its own themes like they're buttons to press for a reaction. It can get a little too pleased with how angry it can make you, and anger is powerful fuel, but it's not the only fuel. If the show leans too long on anger, it risks flattening into one note. What saves it is those small, quiet beats where the anger drains out and you're left with something more tender, the loneliness of being unseen, the exhaustion of constantly proving your worth, the weird grief of realizing you sacrificed for people who never even noticed the sacrifice. There's a personal reason those beats got under my skin. I've had moments in my life where I realized I was the reliable one, in a way that wasn't admirable, it was convenient. I was reliable because I was scared of being inconvenient. I was reliable because I didn't want to risk being dropped. And watching Sion, especially in the way he swallows responses, brought back that exact bodily memory of swallowing your own needs until they feel like they are lodged in your chest. It's uncomfortable. It's also why this story works. It's not fantasy pain. It's familiar pain. Now, something else the drama does well is make credit theft feel intimate. On paper, credit theft is a public thing. Someone else gets the praise. Someone else gets the award. Someone else gets the recognition. But the show frames it like a relationship violation. Like someone stole not just your work but your identity. And that's why the exposure promise feels satisfying. It's not just, he proves them wrong. It's, he takes back his name. And the show's obsession with names, who gets named, who gets labeled, who gets reduced to loser, is not accidental. Labels are control. If you can label someone, you can treat them accordingly. If you can make the whole room agree on the label, you don't even have to justify your cruelty. The cruelty becomes normal. So when Sion steps into public light, the real victory isn't that he's admired. It's that the label breaks. The spell breaks. Rehook, what happens when the spell breaks and you realize you've been living inside other people's delusions for years? That's where the drama's visual language becomes quietly haunting. It loves showing characters surrounded by expensive surfaces that suddenly look brittle. Glass, polished stone, clean lines. It's like the world is beautiful but cold, and the coldness is the point. Because this isn't a warm family drama. It's a status drama dressed in domestic clothing. The home is a stage for hierarchy. The marriage is a contract of convenience. The love is conditional. And the show's best scenes let you feel that coldness not as aesthetic, but as emotional reality. You can almost feel the temperature drop when certain characters enter a room. Not because of supernatural vibes, but because the actors carry that "I own the air" posture. Shoulders back, chin slightly raised, eyes that don't search for connection, they search for compliance. That kind of performance is hard to do without becoming cartoonish, and the cast mostly nails it by keeping the arrogance controlled, not twirl a mustache obvious. Still, there are moments where the drama leans into melodrama in a way that made me roll my eyes just a little. Not enough to stop watching, but enough to remind me I'm watching a heightened story. Sometimes a cruel line is too perfectly cruel. Sometimes a dismissal is too perfectly timed for maximum audience outrage. Real cruelty is often clumsier, more accidental, more deniable. This show sometimes prefers the clean blade. It wants the cut to be visible so you can count the wounds. But then it earns it back with direction choices that feel genuinely thoughtful. Like the way it uses distance. When Sion is being dismissed, the camera often stays far enough away that you feel him as small in the frame. Later, when his agency grows, the camera moves closer and the background blurs, like the world is finally being asked to focus on him. It's a simple shift, but it changes how you feel in your body as a viewer. You stop watching him as a victim in a wide shot and start watching him as a person in a close-up. And I can't stress enough how much that matters for newcomers, because if you've never watched a status reversal drama, you might think that satisfaction is just in plot events. It's not. It's in alignment. It's in the camera finally standing with the person who's been standing alone. Here's a mini-scene vibe that stuck with me, not because of what happens, but because of how it's shot. Sion is in a space where he used to be ignored. People are there, moving, talking. The sound is busy. Then something shifts, maybe a piece of information, maybe just the atmosphere of his presence, and the sound mix subtly thins. Suddenly you hear a chair scrape. A breath. A pause between words. The camera catches Sion's face from a slight angle, not straight on, so you're seeing him like someone watching from the side, like the world is still trying not to look at him directly. And in that angle, you see the tension in his jaw, the steadiness in his eyes, and the faintest flicker of sadness. Not sadness for them. Sadness for him. For the fact that this is what it took. That's the kind of shot where you realize the show is trying to be more than a revenge vending machine. Now, we've talked a lot about Sion and Cersei, but the family dynamic matters too, even if we're not naming specific relatives. The family operates like a collective ego. There's a shared belief system, status is everything, gratitude is optional, and those beneath you exist to serve. That belief system is what makes their regret so bitter later, because regret isn't just personal, it's systemic collapse. It's the family realizing their worldview was wrong, and worldview is harder to change than feelings. And that's why I'm not fully satisfied when the drama occasionally slips into individual villain framing, like it's only Cersei or only one thief. The more powerful version is when the drama shows how an entire culture of entitlement produces these outcomes. One person can be cruel. A whole system makes cruelty feel normal. Rehook, if a whole system benefited from your silence, can any one apology ever be enough? That's a question the show hovers around, and it's where I think it could go even harder emotionally. Because the deeper wound here isn't, Cersei was cold. The deeper wound is, Sion's humanity was never part of the equation. That's not fixed by a grand regret moment. That's fixed by a complete shift in how people perceive him, and more importantly, how he perceives himself. And that brings me to what I think is the drama's real theme, self-perception. When you live as a loser long enough, even if you know you're not, you start internalizing the role in ways you don't notice. You start moving like a person who doesn't belong. You start speaking like your words are optional. You start anticipating dismissal and pre-dismissing yourself to soften the blow. The show's best work is in showing Sion gradually unlearning that posture. You can actually track it through his physicality. Early on, his movements are efficient but careful, like his trying not to disturb the room. Later, his movements become deliberate, like his no longer asking the room for permission. And again, that's not swagger. It's presence. It's the difference between "I'm here" and "I'm allowed." The show's sound design supports that too. Footsteps get heavier. Doors sound more final. The world starts reacting to him rather than him reacting to the world. That's how you make a character arc feel physical. Now, one criticism I want to make that might be unpopular, but hidden savior trope can sometimes cheapen intimacy because it turns love into a test. Will you love me without knowing who I am? That's a romantic fantasy, but it can be manipulative in real life. And this drama skirts that line. Sion is hiding his role, and while the story frames it as promise and protection, there's still an element of emotional withholding. It creates a dynamic where Cersei and her family are judged for not appreciating what they never fully understood. To be clear, the drama also shows they were cruel regardless. They didn't need to know his savior identity to treat him like a person. So I'm not letting them off the hook. I'm just saying the trope itself creates an interesting moral wrinkle. If you hide your value, you can't be shocked when people misjudge you, except the misjudgment shouldn't translate into dehumanization. The show thrives in that tension, whether it always names it or not. Re-hook, is Sion's secrecy a shield, or is it a trap he built for himself? That question is why I'm so invested in seeing whether the story lets Sion evolve beyond savior. Because savior is still a role defined by others' needs. If he remains the savior, he may never learn how to be loved without being useful. And that, to me, would be the saddest possible win. There's also something to say about the way the drama handles masculinity. It frames Sion's endurance as strength, but it also shows how endurance can become emotional self-neglect. The drama doesn't mock him for being patient. It doesn't call him weak. It calls the world cruel. That's good. But it also risks romanticizing suffering as proof of love, which is a message I'm always wary of. The healthier message is that love doesn't require humiliation, and the show edges toward that message when it makes leaving the true turning point. And I want to give the writing credit for not making leaving easy. Emotionally, leaving is hard. Even if someone is cruel, you can still love them. You can still want them to understand. You can still remember the version of them you thought existed. Leaving is not just walking away, it's killing your own hope. The drama captures that without needing to show melodramatic sobbing. It shows it in resignation. In finality. In a character choosing not to beg anymore. Now, since you asked for another part, I'm continuing this thought rather than wrapping, because there's still more to explore about how the show treats regret, not as redemption but as a kind of punishment that doesn't actually fix anything. Bitter regret doesn't rebuild what was broken. It just confirms the break. And that's where the show's most haunting implication lies. Even if Cersei regrets, even if the family regrets, the years don't come back. The humiliation happened. The erasure happened. The relationship was shaped by those choices. There's no undo button. There's only what you do with the truth once it's finally visible. Re-hook, when the truth is finally visible, who is it for, Sion, or the crowd? Because the crowd wants a story. The crowd wants a villain and a hero. The crowd wants a clean moral. Sion wants something else. He wants his life back. And those desires don't always align. The drama's strongest path forward, in my opinion, is to keep the crowd as a force that can validate but also distort. Public validation feels good, but it can also pressure you to perform your pain. To act like the victim in the way people expect. To deliver your dignity like a speech. And Sion, as a character, has spent years refusing to perform. If he starts performing now, even for righteous reasons, it risks turning him into another kind of prisoner. So I keep watching for moments where he refuses the script. Where he doesn't give the crowd what it wants. Where he chooses quiet self-respect over public theatrical satisfaction. Those moments, when they come, are the ones that make the drama feel like it has a heartbeat rather than just a plot engine. And there's still a lot to say about the show's emotional aftertaste, about how it makes you complicit in wanting regret as entertainment and then makes you sit with the emptiness of that desire, because the harsh truth is that watching someone regret doesn't heal you. It just proves you were right to hurt. Healing is what happens when you stop needing proof, and I want to see whether this drama is brave enough to let Sion reach that place, or whether it keeps him on the stage as the great savior because that's the more addictive fantasy.